I truly do not know where to begin with this one. To someone who has little interest in JRPGs, Persona 5 might seem like a weeb high school simulator with some Pokemon-style combat. But to those like myself who love turn-based JRPGs, Persona 5 is almost a deeply religious experience. This game has enough content that it can be chopped up and unraveled to make 6 different games, yet it's all in one package and is blisteringly fun and engaging the entire way through. Combat is flashy, fast, and fun, while the story treats you like an adult with a head between your shoulders. And don't get me started on the music. Persona 5 puts you in the shoes of a teenager who does what he thinks is right and steps up to help a woman in distress. He's rewarded with a new criminal record and a reputation as a delinquent who corrupts others into following his rebellious footsteps. It's up to us to deal with this unfair decision by keeping our heads low and serving our probation, and falling back in line with the expectations of the cruel adults who run this world. However, just as we were mistreated, so too do we find a tangled web of mistreatment at our school. Mr. Kamoshida is a volleyball coach at Shujin Academy, and while our first few dealings with the man show him to just simply be rude and manipulative, we soon begin to dig into his dealings to uncover far more sinister acts. We find out that Kamoshida physically and sexually abuses his students, and while most of the faculty know about what is happening, all are scared to speak against the king in his castle. So just as that fateful night that falsely branded us a criminal so long ago, we are presented a choice: to interfere and risk being outcasted if we fail to exercise justice, or stand by and let all this happen and maintain the status quo, allow the cruel adult to walk all over the weak, or stand up for the lowly and bring this true criminal to justice. So we decide to put an end to Kamoshida's reign. But where do we even start? Well, thankfully Persona 5 reinforces the theme that we should stand up for what is right and fight injustices in our lives by introducing a fake magical world based on imagination and cognition as the only good means of combating a wicked society. Jokes aside, our player character's strong sense of justice and rebellion allows us into the metaverse, a place where people with twisted cognitions of the world around them manifest their cognitions into what's called palaces. Basically domains outside of reality where a person's twisted heart acts as a ruler over their own perverted paradise. For example, Kamoshida's palace is a twisted version of Shujin Academy, warped into a castle where the teenagers suffer his every whim and desire and torture. We accidentally stumble into this whole metaverse reality, and inside we meet Morgana, a cat who acts as our encyclopedia and guide for all this early game metaverse stuff. Morgana isn't our only companion, as we're joined by Ryuji Sakamoto, an outcast delinquent who was a star track athlete, but who dared to step up to Kamoshida's abuse. In a physical confrontation between the two, Kamoshida broke Ryuji's leg and disbanded the track team. This whole event sets up Ryuji's motivation to join us, but also shows the ruthlessness that Kamoshida will happily dish out to keep his twisted vision alive. Our other teammate at this point is An Takamaki, one of the direct victims of Kamoshida's sexual abuse. Over the course of a few weeks, we watch her and her friend Shiho get manipulated to the point that Shiho attempts to commit suicide, and in her grief, An decides to rebel against society with us, Ryuji and Morgana. Morgana explains to us that it's possible to have a corrupted individual confess to and turn away from his evil deeds by having their shadow self in the metaverse get pummeled to the point of submission and willingly make the change. This whole act is called changing or stealing their heart, and we deliver this beatdown by using our personas. The personas in this game are excellent, ranging from little pixies to giant penises, angels and devils, Egyptian mythologies, Norse mythologies, etc., etc. While most personas have their own strengths and weaknesses, you can more or less build any of these personas any way you want through some complicated ritualistic execution. However, for the first half of the game, you'll be gaining levels so fast and facing harder and harder enemies, you won't really engage with the inner workings of the execution process, unless you're trying to engage with the side content. Later on, however, persona creation is pretty much mandatory to stand a chance against some of the minor bosses and tougher enemies. I played the game on hard the whole time, aside from bumping up to Merciless one time, and I can confidently say that A little bit of grinding can outlevel you enough that most enemies won't be a problem, and creating ultra god mode unkillable personas is never really necessary. However, completely neglect grinding or persona execution and you're in for a very bad time. More on the combat later. For now, hit that like and subscribe button if you're enjoying this video, and if you're not, let me know down below. Moving on, it's time for us to bring Kamoshida to justice by tearing through his palace to find his treasure, a MacGuffin that we need to bring back to the real world in order to finalize the change of heart. While we're looking for it and fighting through Kamoshida's goons, it's hard not to notice how mature this game takes itself and asks you to be. I'm gonna do my best to word this in a way that makes sense, but this whole first act with Kamoshida involves things like real-world violence, sexual assault on minors, blackmail, threats of jail time, abuse of power, personas with giant spiky penises, and some wearing lingerie that we threaten at gunpoint to join us or die. The pitch black themes and tones are really appreciated, as I feel the message that this story is trying to tell wouldn't have landed the same if everything was toned down. In fact, it starts to ramp up as we reach the end of Kamoshida's palace, a place where the decor becomes far more sexual in nature, even statues that are only of the girl's chest and lower regions. Anything that's not sexual has been removed, presumably because Kamoshida doesn't feel like they're worth putting on display. His boss design reflects all this too, as he goes from a guy in just a Speedo and a king's cape to a grotesque, slimy freak who proudly wears all his desires on his sleeve. After we beat him to a pulp, Kamoshida's shadow asks us to kill him, but we can't, because if you die in a palace, you die in real life. Plus, is justice truly served if the culprit faces no consequences for their actions? He confesses his wrongdoings to the public, and just like that, our first change of heart has been accomplished. This whole arc literally could have been a whole game. It has a very strong plot progression, an almost perfect villain, some excellent character growth, symbolized by Ryuji's and Ann's personas awakening. This whole first sequence is timeless, and I struggle to see how Atlus is going to top this introductory arc in Persona 6. However, I will say this, if you've made it this far into the game and you decided that you don't like it, now is the perfect time to leave the game. You've basically seen what the game has in store by now, aside from some more characters and cooler powers and personas. The formula remains this for the rest of the game. There's idle time between palaces where you level up confidants, grind in mementos, and discover a new threat. After some preliminary stake setting and recon, you're given some days to clear that palace, beat the boss, and then do it again. If the gameplay doesn't strike you as fun or the atmosphere isn't doing it, then you won't really like anything else down the road. So save yourself the literal 90 hours left in the runtime. There's quite a few negatives that have emerged by now too that you're sure to notice even if you love the game like myself. First off is something I just kind of mentioned. This game is long and asks a lot of idle time of walking around and reading dialogue. This game took me 137 hours to beat the second time around, and I'm sure the first one was about 100 hours back in the day before the Royal Edition. That is a lot of time to expect anyone to sink into a game, especially someone who isn't really sold on the whole JRPG thing. Another thing, and this mainly involves us who play on harder difficulties, is this game can be unrelentingly brutal in combat. Some enemies feel like they can kill you in 1 or 2 rounds, while you're barely sneezing at them, which isn't a problem in itself. The problem is when it comes to grinding, you can fight these guys 20 times in a row of the same enemies, which can be exhausting and kill any fun or momentum you had going. While the obvious solution to that is to go down in difficulty, but the main problem now is the game becomes too easy. There really isn't a happy medium with the difficulty. Either it's too easy and you rarely engage with any of the game mechanics, or it's unfairly difficult and you'll die to the same enemies over and over. Also, the early game grinding kind of blows because you don't have access to any of the mechanics and perks that make grinding easier. For now, the last negative to mention is, oh my god, the shimmering in this game is horrible, and once you notice it, it'll drive you crazy. Let's go ahead and hit that like and subscribe button as we move on. As much as I want to, I'm not going to dissect every arc, but the game certainly begins to open up about here, as we have access to more of the life simulation aspect. So, the life simulation is like a totally different game from the whole Palace and Memento sections. Basically, every day is split into 2 parts, primarily the day and night parts. During the day, you can either go to a palace or mementos, or spend time with your combat partners. At night, the non-combat confidants become available. There's a few other things you can do throughout the day and night, such as bathe, play darts, or go fishing, but the main thing you'll focus on is your confidants. As you gain deeper bonds with certain people, you will gain some very important bonuses. For example, getting on to rank 4 allows her to force an enemy to skip a turn on rare occasions. The social sim of Persona 5 Royal is the best there's ever been in this series, but it's far from perfect. Long story short, the social sim is far too gamified to be completely taken seriously. Every confidant has 10 ranks, so there's a lot of padding where you just meet with someone to briefly discuss their woes, and suddenly you've crossed over into a new rank. Some of these stories don't need to be stretched into 10 episodes, so they can definitely drag. Which is a shame because most of them are interesting stories if told differently or more concisely. But there's only so many times that Haru can tell me that she's uncertain about her company's future before all her episodes start to blend into each other. Another thing is that by allowing the player to see what perks you'll unlock next, it artificially prioritizes some confidants more than others. Most players are going to go for the fortune teller as fast as they can, whether they like her or not, because the perks you get from her story are literally game changing. Versus someone like Awai, who I honestly forgot was anything more than a shopkeeper till near the end of the game, because I was busy with other confidants. All of this gamified social link system stuff just simply diminishes the characters to little battle passes that may or may not have interesting stories to tell on the side. However, for the players that do like visual novel style storytelling and can overlook the gamey nature of the social links, there's a lot of story to dive into. To stick to some characters we've already talked about as examples, An has an entire redemption arc as she repairs her relationship with her best friend. And Ryuji's story is all about heroically overcoming obstacles for the benefit of others, even if you get no reward for doing so. There's like 5,000 of these little stories to delve through, so if that's your thing, then there you go. Also, I forgot to mention that every confidant level increases how powerful the personas you make can become when executing them. So there's also something to be aiming for even if you don't really like any particular character. I'm not ashamed to say that I skipped all the dialogue for the Sun Arcana and the Tower Arcana. Another high point for the story that I want to mention is Sai Nijima's palace. I don't think it's the best palace, but it's the perfect representation of what Persona 5 is trying to accomplish with its presentation. The amazing music paired with bright flashy colors and casino themed gimmicks, as well as having the entire cast and crew, aside from one, at your disposal, makes this whole game harmonize in a way that's hard to describe. The eccentric main villainess of this arc is the cherry on top, and comparing her to her real-world counterpart makes you feel like you're prying where you don't belong, and I love it. This is also when the game's combat is firing on all cylinders. If you haven't figured out the combat by now, this game is gonna chew you up starting about here. Okay, after you hit that like and subscribe button, we can move on to the music. Rivers in the Desert is the reason I bought a guitar again after not touching one in years. And Last Surprise is arguably the greatest battle theme in the history of ever. The entire soundtrack is top of the top, but I cannot believe how well composed and mixed the battle themes are. Even with the cacophony of screaming and magic blasts and sword slashes, the battle themes all bleed in and out perfectly, and they're so well created that just listening to the song raw is still a pleasant time. I often find myself getting bored of JRPG's sounds and music about halfway through a game, but not this one. Even after the 1000th battle, it still never gets old. You can also change the battle theme if you wear the Persona 3 outfit, which I thought is a cool Easter egg. Let me know down below what your favorite Persona 5 song is. The sounds of navigating the menus, paired with the snappy and stylish designs, creates a soundscape that just works from start to finish. The only real negative of the audio is in the early game, Morgana tends to repeat himself in combat. This problem slowly gets alleviated as you gain more powers and people, so the voice lines start to vary, but when you're running around with you, Ryuji, and Morgana, get ready to hear the same 3 lines over and over. I truly believe you can't find a better mix of atmosphere, presentation, theming, combat, and characters in a game that's going to give you more than 100 hours of solid, dynamic gameplay like you can in Persona 5. I highly suggest the Royal version, as to be honest, it's almost a perfect game. I honestly do not know how Atlus is going to top Persona 5. Metaphor ReFantazio is rumored to be a tech demo for Persona 6, and while I've been disappointed with Metaphor so far, there's enough bones in that game to craft something that even Persona 5 will struggle to hold a candle to. And I do hope that Persona 6 blows us away, because the single player game industry could use some more good wins. If you made it this far, tell me down below what palace or confidant was your favorite. I'll tell you mine. Goro Akechi is by far my favorite character, and Futaba's palace was my favorite. For now, I've been Ropeburn. Like and subscribe, and I'll see you on the next one.